When wilderness borders blur with human reach, the balance tilts violently. Villages scatter, cabins crumble, and rivers turn red beneath the weight of instinct unleashed. What begins as quiet observation ends in chaos no one expects. From an Alaskan fishing village in 2025 to a Finnish forest in 2021, each encounter grows more feral. In this video, we'll dive into 6 chilling tales of bear attacks on humans, exploring the raw power of nature and the moments when survival hangs by a thread. A remote coastal fishing village along Alaska's southeastern edge lay nestled where the frigid waters of the North Pacific met dense forests of spruce and hemlock. Established in the early 1900s by settlers seeking fortune in salmon fishing, the community had grown into a close-knit population of roughly 200, bound by their shared reliance on the sea. After more than a century of storms, lean seasons, and triumphs, the people of this small harbor believed they understood their world well, until the evening that challenged everything. The day had been fruitful. Fishing crews returned to the docks around 7 in the evening, their boats heavy with salmon glinting silver in the fading sunlight. The air smelled of salt, diesel, and fish, thick and familiar. Wooden crates were stacked in neat rows, barrels filled with ice lined the dock, and the rhythmic sounds of cleaning knives and clinking metal blended with gull calls above the harbor. James Miller, a seasoned fisherman in his early 40s, worked at the cleaning station with steady precision. Nearby, Daniel Cooper, a younger man in his 20s, stacked crates, while Emily Brooks secured ropes and prepared gear for the next morning. The atmosphere was calm, the kind of quiet satisfaction that followed a productive day at sea. Then, without warning, the forest edge stirred. From the shadowed tree line about 50 yards away, a massive coastal grizzly emerged, an animal of staggering size and presence, drawn by the overpowering scent of fish that drifted inland from the docks. Its fur was dark and thick, its shoulders rippling with muscle as it advanced with unsettling speed. Within moments, the bear was on the beach, closing the distance between wilderness and human space. The first crash came as it collided with a stack of crates near the dock's entrance. Wood splintered and fell into the water, startling everyone into frozen disbelief before shouts of alarm broke the stillness. Panic rippled through the workers. James reacted first. He grabbed a flare from the emergency kit and lit it, the bright red flame casting harsh light across the darkening dock. Waving it toward the approaching animal, he tried to drive it back. For a heartbeat, the bear hesitated, its small eyes fixed on the strange light, but hunger quickly overrode hesitation. It lunged forward, the dock vibrating under its weight. The impact threw James backward into a post, knocking the flare from his grasp. He fell hard, winded and stunned, as the flare sputtered beside a coil of rope. Nearby, Daniel slipped on the slick planks as he tried to retreat, crashing onto the deck amid shattered wood and spilled ice. Emily, frozen at first, broke into motion and ran toward the warehouse at the far end of the dock. The bear pivoted sharply, reacting to movement, and closed the gap in seconds. She stumbled forward and fell behind an overturned fishing boat, her breath ragged as she tried to stay out of sight. The grizzly, now surrounded by the smell of hundreds of freshly caught fish, growled and tore open barrels, scattering salmon across the planks. It paused only to seize a fish in its jaws before continuing its destructive path, blocking the dock's main route to safety and trapping several workers near the water's edge. From nearby buildings, villagers rushed out with anything that could make noise. Metal drums were struck with wrenches and hammers, creating a deafening clamor. People shouted and threw debris, trying to push the animal back toward the forest. The bear swatted at a flying crate, sending it into the water, and bellowed in response, a deep, resonant roar that seemed to shake the dock itself. For nearly 10 tense minutes, the standoff held. The bear prowled back and forth, occasionally charging short distances whenever someone moved too quickly. Workers huddled behind stacks of equipment, maintaining as much distance as possible while others tried to keep its attention divided. The scene was chaotic. Flashing flares, shouting voices, and the constant low rumble of the bear's growl blending with the crash of waves against the pilings. Help finally arrived from the sea. A patrol boat carrying wildlife officers and local authorities approached from the harbor, alerted by frantic radio transmissions. The team used loudhailers and fired warning shots into the air, sharp echoing reports that broke through the noise. The bear stopped mid-motion, ears pricking, eyes wide. After a long, tense pause, it turned toward the tree line and began retreating, lumbering back across the beach and vanishing into the dark forest beyond the village perimeter. As silence returned, the villagers gathered to assess the aftermath. Several people were injured, some from falling debris, others from desperate escapes, but all were alive. James was helped to his feet, clutching his shoulder, while Emily and Daniel sat together near the dock's edge, shaken but conscious. Within an hour, medical responders escorted 5 residents to a regional hospital in southern Alaska for treatment. The dock, however, was left in ruins. Crates lay shattered, ice and fish scattered across the planks, and several sections of walkway had collapsed completely under the bear's weight. More than the physical damage, though. The emotional toll was visible. The once comfortable routine of evening work had been broken, replaced by the awareness that even here, on familiar ground, under the open sky, wildness was never truly distant. In the following days, the community worked tirelessly to rebuild. Sections of the dock were replaced, and new safety measures were introduced. Motion-activated lights, secure storage for fish waste, and air horns kept within reach at every workstation. Fishermen began carrying deterrents alongside their usual gear, while evening shifts were reduced until daylight hours returned in full. The event became a shared story among residents, a moment that would be retold each season as both warning and testament. The village endured, as it always had, but something fundamental had changed. The people now moved through their routines with heightened awareness, their respect for the wild sharpened by memory. The Grizzly's brief, violent visit left no lasting physical trace once repairs were complete, but its presence lingered in the collective consciousness of the harbor. On still evenings, when the sun slipped behind the coastal mountains and the air grew thick with the scent of fish and salt, some swore they could still hear faint echoes of the bear's roar carried by the wind, a reminder of nature's unpredictable power and of the fragile balance between survival and coexistence along the wild edge of the Pacific. The town of Ridgemont sat in the western foothills of the Oregon Cascades, roughly 30 miles from the nearest major city. It had gradually transformed into a suburban enclave where families sought affordable housing and proximity to nature. By September 2024, the population had swelled to just over 8,000 residents, many of whom had moved from urban centers during the remote work boom of the early 2020s. The town bordered dense forest preserves where black bears, deer, and occasional mountain lions still roamed, despite increasing human development. Wildlife sightings had become more frequent as homes pushed deeper into traditional animal territories, though serious encounters remained relatively rare. On the afternoon of September 14th, 2024, Maya Thompson and Leah Carter were walking along Pinecrest Avenue, a quiet residential street that marked the eastern edge of Ridgemont's suburban sprawl. Maya, a 26-year-old freelance photographer with a popular social media following, had convinced her friend Leah to join her for what she called a nature walk. In reality, Maya was hunting for content that might go viral. Leah, 31 and considerably more cautious by nature, had agreed reluctantly, bringing along pepper spray and insisting they stay on paved roads rather than venturing onto hiking trails. The afternoon was warm and cloudless, with golden light filtering through the towering Douglas firs that lined both sides of the street. They had been walking for roughly 20 minutes, discussing weekend plans and complaining about work deadlines, when Maya suddenly grabbed Leah's arm and pointed ahead. Roughly 40 feet up the road, a young black bear had emerged from between 2 houses and was now sniffing around a row of garbage bins that residents had placed out for collection the following morning. Maya's eyes lit up with excitement. She immediately pulled out her phone and began filming, narrating in an enthusiastic whisper about the unexpected wildlife encounter. The bear, probably a juvenile weighing around 150 pounds, appeared focused entirely on investigating the bins for food. Its glossy black coat caught the sunlight as it used its claws to pry at a plastic lid. Leah urged her friend to back away slowly and give the animal space, but Maya was already moving forward. She explained in hushed tones that this was a perfect opportunity for a selfie that would generate massive engagement on her photography account. She had seen other content creators post similar images, and none of them had gotten hurt. Besides, the bear looked young and relatively small. What could go wrong? Maya set her canvas snack bag down on the curb, not thinking about the trail mix and granola bars inside. She advanced to within 15 feet of the bear, holding her phone at arm's length to frame both herself and the animal in the shot. The bear lifted its head and stared at her, and for a few seconds nothing happened. Maya smiled and snapped several photos, already imagining the captions she would write. Then the bear's attention shifted to the snack bag Maya had left behind. Its nose twitched as it caught the scent of food, and it began moving toward the bag with sudden interest. Maya, still focused on getting the perfect angle, didn't initially notice the change in the animal's demeanor. By the time she registered that the bear was now approaching her rather than the garbage bins, it was nearly on top of her. The bear hesitated briefly, standing on its hind legs to get a better view and smell of the situation. Then, with frightening speed, it dropped to all fours and lunged. Maya's scream died in her throat as the animal's claws raked across her left leg, tearing through her jeans and opening deep gashes in the flesh beneath. She stumbled backward, arms windmilling for balance, and her ankle twisted violently as her foot caught on an uneven section of pavement. The phone flew from her hand and shattered against the asphalt. The bear bit at her right calf, not with the force that a truly aggressive animal might use, but enough to puncture skin and muscle. Maya collapsed onto her side, pain exploding through her legs as she tried desperately to crawl away. The bear stood over her for a moment, huffing and pawing at the ground near her head. Leah, who had been frozen in terror several yards back, finally found her voice and began screaming. She grabbed a metal trash can lid from a nearby bin and began banging it against the pavement, creating a loud clanging that echoed between the houses. She shouted and waved her arms, doing everything she could to appear large and threatening, despite the terror coursing through her veins. The noise seemed to confuse the bear. It took a step back from Maya, then another, its small eyes darting between the two women. Leah continued her frantic noise-making, and after several tense seconds that felt like hours, the bear turned and loped back toward the tree line. It disappeared into the forest within moments, leaving only trampled vegetation and Maya's scattered belongings as evidence it had been there at all. Neighbors had heard the commotion and were already rushing out of their homes. Someone called emergency services, while others brought towels to help staunch the bleeding from Maya's legs. She lay on the pavement, crying from pain and shock, while Leah crouched beside her repeating that help was coming and everything would be okay. Maya suffered deep bruises and multiple lacerations requiring over 40 stitches. Her twisted ankle needed weeks of physical therapy. Leah had sustained minor scratches on her arms, likely from her own frantic movements rather than direct contact with the bear. Both women were treated and released from the hospital the following day. Wildlife authorities arrived within the hour to investigate. They examined the scene, noting the snack bag still on the curb and the bear's tracks leading into the forest. Officials issued a statement warning residents about the dangers of approaching wildlife, particularly when food sources were present. They emphasized that black bears, while generally less aggressive than grizzlies, could become dangerous when they associated humans with food or felt threatened. Maya deleted her social media accounts within a week of the incident, unable to face the mixture of sympathy and criticism that flooded her posts. The experience had shattered her casual attitude toward wildlife, replacing it with a healthy respect and lingering anxiety about outdoor spaces. The Ussuri-Krai region of far eastern Russia stretched along the border with China, a vast wilderness of dense taiga forests, winding rivers, and rugged mountains that remained largely untouched by modern development. Even in 2023, the area retained its wild and ancient character. Brown bears, Amur tigers, and countless fish species thrived in ecosystems that had changed little over centuries. The rivers provided vital spawning grounds for salmon and other freshwater fish, making them invaluable for both scientific study and the predators that relied on them for survival. On September 22, 2023, researcher Ivan Morozov navigated a small aluminum motorboat along a tributary of the Ussuri River, roughly 70 kilometers from the nearest settlement. Ivan, a 43-year-old ichthyologist working for a regional university research program, had spent nearly 2 decades studying freshwater ecosystems across the Russian Far East. This particular expedition focused on mapping salmon spawning sites in previously undocumented stretches of river, and he had been operating alone for nearly a week in remote terrain. Trailing him at a distance of about 30 meters was his colleague Sergei Petrov. At 37, Sergei was newer to fieldwork in such isolated regions and had joined the project to assist with sample collection and gain experience. The two maintained periodic radio contact, but piloted their boats independently to cover more ground. The morning had been calm and productive. Ivan had collected water samples, recorded temperature readings, and marked potential spawning areas. As midday approached, he guided his boat closer to the shaded eastern bank, where low branches dipped toward the water. Cutting the engine to a quiet idle, he leaned over the side to examine a shallow cluster of rocks that seemed ideal for fish nesting. His deck held several containers of fish samples, research instruments, and the remnants of his lunch: bread crusts, a thermos of tea, and the faint scent of fish blood from earlier collection work. In his experience, food odors rarely caused problems. He had spent years in bear country and had grown complacent, leaving food unsecured rather than sealed in the bear-resistant containers recommended by field protocol. The decision would prove fatal. From the tree line behind him, a massive shape began to move. Sergei, positioned slightly downstream, noticed it first. A large male brown bear, easily over 600 pounds, its dark fur slick from the riverbank and shoulders rising in the characteristic muscular hump of the species. The animal had likely been fishing nearby and caught the smell of food and fish drifting from Ivan's boat. Sergei shouted into his radio, trying to alert his colleague, but Ivan had removed his earpiece to better hear the faint movements of fish in the shallows. By the time he sensed something behind him, the bear had already closed most of the distance. The creature burst from the muddy bank in a surge of raw power. It leapt the narrow channel between shore and boat, its full weight slamming into the starboard side. The small vessel rocked violently, nearly overturning. Ivan stumbled backward, grabbing for balance, as the bear climbed aboard in a spray of water and noise that shattered the tranquil isolation of the river. The confined space left no avenue for retreat. The bear swiped with one massive paw, knocking Ivan into the side railing. The blow drove the breath from his lungs and sent instruments tumbling into the water. The animal's teeth closed on his upper arm and shoulder, the pressure forcing him to the deck as equipment scattered beneath them. Sergei gunned his motor and sped toward the struggle, shouting for help into the radio, even though he knew no assistance could arrive quickly in such remote terrain. Grabbing the flare gun from his emergency kit, he fired toward the scene. The flare hissed through the air and burst in a red flash near the bow of Ivan's boat. The bear barely reacted, focused entirely on its target. In desperation, Sergei drew closer and used a long pole to strike at the animal from his own boat. The bear turned briefly, slashing at the intrusion with claws that splintered the pole in half. The small vessels rocked dangerously in the wake of each movement. After several agonizing minutes, the attack ceased. The bear lifted its head, muzzle wet and streaked, and stared directly at Sergei. For a tense moment, neither moved. Then the animal stepped back, pushed off the side of the boat, and disappeared into the trees as swiftly as it had arrived. The sudden silence was almost unbearable, broken only by the slow lapping of water against the damaged hulls. Sergei sat motionless, hands trembling as his mind tried to catch up to the violence that had just unfolded. Ivan's boat drifted downstream, its deck shattered, equipment crushed, and water slowly pooling inside. Sergei eventually forced himself to act, securing a tow line and beginning the long, grim journey back toward the nearest outpost. Every shadow along the shore seemed alive as he scanned for any sign of the returning predator. Hours later, authorities reached the remote section of river and recovered Ivan's remains. Wildlife experts determined that the bear had been drawn by the strong scent of food and fish blood left unsecured in the open air. Once on the boat, the animal likely perceived Ivan as a threat or competitor for food, a common behavioral trigger during the salmon season when bears fiercely defend resources. The incident shocked the local research community. Safety reviews that followed led to stricter operational procedures for anyone conducting ecological studies in regions with large predators. The updated rules required sealed storage for all food and fish samples, constant two-way radio monitoring, and a minimum of two-person teams to reduce isolation risks. Training programs also emphasized recognizing early warning signs of bear activity, fresh tracks, overturned logs, or scat near waterways, and mandated immediate withdrawal at the first indication of a bear's presence. For Sergei, the memory of that day along the Ussuri River never faded. He continued his work, but avoided solo field assignments thereafter. In interviews months later, he described the experience not as a random tragedy, but as a hard reminder of the fragile balance between human exploration and the raw, instinctive power of the natural world. The Ussuri wilderness remained as beautiful and unforgiving as ever, a place where a moment of complacency could erase decades of experience in a heartbeat. Kodiak Island sprawled across nearly 3,500 square miles off the southern coast of Alaska. By early 2025, most of its 14,000 residents lived around the town of Kodiak on the eastern shore, while the island's vast interior remained largely wild, an untamed expanse of mountains, rivers, and coastal inlets, forming one of the last strongholds for the Kodiak bear, a subspecies of brown bear that ranked among the largest terrestrial predators on Earth. On March 18, 2025, Tyler Brooks, a 32-year-old professional snowboarder from Colorado, stood at the base of an unnamed slope in the island's southwestern interior, roughly 40 miles from the nearest settlement. He had arrived on the island 3 days earlier with backcountry permits, safety equipment, and plans to film a solo expedition showcasing the island's untouched alpine terrain. The weather that morning was clear but bitterly cold. Fresh snowfall overnight had left a pristine layer of powder, nearly 8 inches deep across the upper ridges. After 2 strenuous hours of ascent, Tyler reached the ridgeline at about 2,800 feet. The view stretched endlessly, peaks rolling toward the horizon, each blanketed in snow that caught the pale sunlight. He transitioned his splitboard back into ride mode, locked his bindings, and pushed off from the ridge. The first few hundred yards were effortless and exhilarating. Snow burst around him in glowing sprays as he carved broad arcs down the untouched slope, his shouts of joy lost in the wind. Halfway down, he stopped beside a cluster of wind-stunted spruce trees to catch his breath and adjust his bindings, which had begun to loosen. Setting his board upright in the snow, he dropped his pack and knelt to work. Without thinking, he pulled out a small stuff sack containing energy bars, jerky, and trail mix. He set it beside him, unaware that the scent of food, especially the opened jerky, was now carrying on the breeze through the trees above. Focused on his bindings, Tyler didn't immediately notice the faint rustle of movement in the distance. When he finally looked up, his pulse froze. About 40 yards upslope, half hidden among the trees, stood a Kodiak bear. Even at that distance, its massive frame and thick, dark coat were unmistakable. Tyler estimated it weighed close to 900 pounds. The animal's head was lowered, its dark eyes fixed squarely on him. For a moment, neither moved. Tyler slowly rose, trying to keep his movements calm. His heart hammered in his chest as he began to speak in a steady voice, hoping sound alone might dissuade the bear. But the animal's attention had already shifted. Its nose twitched as it caught the concentrated scent of food emanating from the small bag beside him. Its demeanor changed instantly, from cautious curiosity to direct intent. The bear began advancing with slow, measured steps, then broke into a run that devoured the distance in seconds. Tyler turned and tried to retreat downslope, but the deep snow swallowed his boots. He waved his arms, shouting to appear larger, but the bear charged straight through the powder and struck him with a force that felt like being hit by a moving vehicle. Tyler was hurled backward, tumbling through the snow in a blur of white and impact. The bear followed, pawing and swiping as it closed in. One blow tore through the side of his jacket, slicing across his ribs. Pain flared and heat spread through the cold as he rolled, crashing against buried rocks and ice-hard branches. He slammed into a low boulder that stopped his descent with a jarring thud. The impact drove the air from his lungs. The bear was already on him again, jaws clamping onto his shoulder. Tyler felt immense pressure and heard the dull crack of something giving way inside his chest. Adrenaline surged as he struggled to reach his emergency harness. They slid together further down the slope until the terrain leveled out against a small ridge. In that frozen chaos, Tyler's hand found the flare gun clipped to his vest. He pulled it free, fumbling with numb fingers, and aimed at the snow in front of the bear. The flare ignited with a thunderous crack, exploding into blinding red light and thick smoke. The sudden burst startled the animal, which reared back, huffing and shaking its massive head. Tyler fired a second flare. This one landed closer, scattering sparks and filling the air with acrid smoke. The bear paused, exhaled in a low grunt, then turned and lumbered away, disappearing over the ridge in a matter of seconds. The only sounds left were Tyler's ragged breathing and the hiss of the fading flare. He remained motionless for several minutes, half buried in snow, afraid the bear might return. Gradually, the cold began seeping through his shredded clothing, forcing him to move. Pain radiated from his chest and shoulder, but he managed to sit up and take stock. His board was gone, lost somewhere upslope. His left arm throbbed, his ribs burned, and his vision blurred from blood trickling into one eye. Despite everything, his emergency beacon remained intact. With trembling hands, he pressed the activation switch. Hours passed before help arrived. A search and rescue helicopter finally located his signal and airlifted him to safety. Tyler was transported to Anchorage, where he spent 4 days hospitalized with 3 broken ribs, deep bruising, and multiple lacerations requiring more than 60 stitches. He also suffered mild hypothermia from prolonged exposure to sub-freezing temperatures. In the aftermath, wildlife authorities reiterated long-standing warnings about Kodiak Island's unpredictable backcountry. Even experienced adventurers, they emphasized, must remain vigilant, storing food in sealed, bear-resistant containers and maintaining constant awareness of surroundings. The Kodiak bear, despite its often solitary nature, remained a powerful reminder that the island's wilderness belonged first and foremost to its wildlife. Tyler recovered fully over the following months, but admitted in interviews that the experience permanently altered his relationship with the outdoors. What had begun as an adventure in untouched beauty became a hard lesson in respect for nature, for instinct, and for the line between human confidence and wild unpredictability. Kodiak's snowy peaks remained breathtaking, but for those who ventured too far without precaution, they carried an unmistakable reminder. In the balance between human ambition and the natural world, nature always decides the final outcome. The Bergwald Zoological Gardens covered nearly 40 acres on the outskirts of a mid-sized city in central Germany. Founded in 1923, the facility was known for its long history of breeding and caring for Arctic wildlife. By April 2017, it housed 3 polar bears, 2 females and 1 large adult male named Magnus, who weighed close to 1,200 pounds. Zookeeper Clara Fischer, 41 years old, began her shift at 6 o'clock that morning, 2 hours before the public would enter the grounds. With nearly 2 decades of experience working with large predators, she was one of the senior keepers assigned to the polar bear section. Despite years of routine familiarity, Clara never forgot that polar bears remained apex predators whose instincts could never be fully subdued by captivity. That day's schedule included maintenance inside the bear holding area. Over the previous week, contractors had repaired several hydraulic gate systems that separated the bears' night dens from the keeper corridor. Clara had been briefed on the progress but had not yet inspected the repaired mechanisms herself. Her colleague Marco Weiss, 36, was working along the outer walkway preparing enrichment activities for the seals in a nearby enclosure. The 2 keepers exchanged a brief wave as Clara entered the service building, carrying a bucket of thawed fish for the morning feed. Inside the holding area, she began her routine by checking the indicator lights that verified each gate's locked position. Every light glowed green, signaling that all 3 bears were secured in their individual dens. What Clara could not see was that the inner gate to Magnus's pen had failed to lock completely. The mechanism's alignment was slightly off, a flaw unnoticed when technicians tested the system the previous afternoon. From the control panel, it appeared secure. In reality, gravity alone kept it resting in place. Clara moved to the feeding station and began sorting fish by size. The bears vocalized from behind the gates, deep rhythmic huffs echoing through the corridor. She approached Magnus's chute first. As she set the bucket down, a metallic scraping sound broke the morning quiet, steel grinding faintly against concrete. She froze. The sound came again, louder. Then she saw the inner gate shift. Magnus's head pushed through the opening, followed by his shoulders and chest. The gate swung aside under his weight. Their eyes met for an instant, hers wide with realization, his dark and unblinking. There was no time to reach the keeper exit or activate the emergency controls. Magnus moved with astonishing speed, crossing the space between them in moments. Clara tried to sidestep toward a supply cabinet, but the bear's momentum carried him straight into her. The impact slammed her against the railing and drove the air from her lungs. She felt a sharp pain in her side as she collapsed to the floor. The bear's weight pressed her down while his immense paws pinned her against the metal barrier. Out on the adjoining walkway, Marco heard a dull metallic crash followed by a muffled shout. Something about the sound told him it wasn't routine. He grabbed his radio and sprinted toward the polar bear exhibit, calling for assistance. As he reached the viewing corridor, the scene beyond the reinforced glass confirmed his worst fear. Inside, Magnus had cornered Clara against the barrier. Marco ran to the emergency station and shattered the glass cover protecting the deterrent spray control. He hit the activation switch, releasing a high-pressure mist designed to disorient large animals. Through the glass, he saw the vapor fill the enclosure, but Magnus barely reacted, his focus fixed on the keeper. Marco triggered the facility's alarm system. A wailing siren echoed across the grounds as other staff raced to respond. Within seconds, the senior supervisor arrived and began directing the emergency team. Two keepers armed with long control poles entered the area through a secondary access door, staying behind the bear and shouting to divert its attention. The combination of chemical spray, noise, and the sudden pressure from multiple directions finally broke Magnus's focus. The bear released Clara and turned toward the disturbance, roaring in confusion. The team maintained distance while continuing to prod and shout, giving another keeper time to reach Clara. Using a hooked safety tool, he caught her vest and dragged her clear through the keeper exit. The incident lasted about 4 minutes from the initial breach to containment. Once Clara was out of reach, the emergency team activated backup hydraulic barriers and gradually herded Magnus back into a secured holding pen. The gates locked with a heavy thud, sealing the area. Paramedics transported Clara to the hospital within minutes. Her injuries were severe, multiple fractures, deep lacerations to her shoulder and torso, and significant blood loss. But she survived after emergency surgery that lasted more than 7 hours. Weeks of intensive care followed, then months of physical rehabilitation. An investigation determined that the accident resulted from the incomplete engagement of a locking bolt in the newly repaired gate. The contractors responsible for the hydraulic system had failed to perform a full mechanical verification. Zoo administration subsequently overhauled its safety protocols. All mechanical gates now required dual confirmation by separate staff members before any keeper entered an enclosure or service corridor. Regular third-party inspections were also mandated to ensure mechanical reliability. Magnus remained in his enclosure after the incident. Authorities agreed that the animal had behaved according to instinct, responding to a perceived opportunity created by human oversight, rather than showing abnormal aggression. The event served as a sobering reminder for institutions around the world that even in controlled environments, the power of apex predators demands unwavering caution. Years of familiarity and routine can dull vigilance, but in facilities housing animals of such size and strength, absolute precision is the only true safeguard. Finnish Lapland stretched across the northernmost reaches of Finland, an immense wilderness of boreal forest and tundra that had remained largely unchanged for millennia. By September 2021, conservation efforts had allowed brown bear populations to rebound to an estimated 2,000 individuals scattered across the country's northern regions. On the morning of September 7th, 2021, 29-year-old Tomi Virtanen navigated a narrow dirt road that wound deep into the forest, roughly 60 kilometers northeast of Rovaniemi. Tomi, a freelance videographer and drone operator, had built a modest business producing aerial footage for tourism projects and social media. Skilled at piloting drones, he specialized in capturing wildlife footage that showcased the untamed beauty of Finland's far north. The day was crisp and bright, with early autumn color just beginning to touch the birches. Temperatures hovered near 10 degrees Celsius, and a light breeze carried the scent of damp moss and pine. The week before, Tomi had explored this same region and found promising signs of bear activity: claw marks on trunks, overturned stones, and scat containing berry seeds. He hoped to record bears feeding before they retreated into hibernation later in the season. He parked his vehicle in a small clearing and set out on foot with his camera gear, laptop, spare drone batteries, and minimal camping equipment. After hiking for about 40 minutes, he reached a large clearing visible on his satellite maps, a broad, open patch nearly 2 acres across, carpeted with blueberry and crowberry bushes. He positioned himself between two large boulders at the clearing's edge, where he would remain hidden while flying. Tommy powered up his high-end quadcopter, its rotors lifting it steadily through the trees until it broke into open air above the canopy. He filmed wide shots of the surrounding wilderness, the endless forest fading toward distant fells, a silver lake glinting in the low sunlight, and the berry clearing below. Satisfied with the landscape footage, he lowered the drone to hover roughly 6 meters above the center of the clearing, adjusting the lens angle for a better composition. The drone's motors emitted a sharp, continuous buzzing that carried through the still forest. Tommy, focused entirely on his monitor, didn't consider how the unfamiliar sound might be perceived by the local wildlife. Moments later, movement caught his attention on the screen. A large male brown bear, roughly 450 pounds, had stepped from the trees at the far edge of the clearing. Its thick, dark coat and heavy gait identified it as an experienced adult. The bear paused, sniffing the air, its ears rotating toward the drone's high-pitched hum. Tommy felt a surge of excitement. He adjusted the drone's camera angle to center the animal in frame, lowering the craft slightly to achieve a dramatic perspective. As the drone descended, the bear's posture shifted, the ears flattened and its head swayed side to side, signs of agitation that Tommy failed to notice while absorbed in his camera feed. The bear's gaze lifted toward the drone, then turned toward the tree line where Tommy was hidden. Within seconds, the animal pinpointed his location. Tommy realized something was wrong only when the bear began advancing, first at a steady walk, then at a purposeful trot directly across the clearing. He looked up from his controller just as it closed half the distance. Startled, he dropped the device, scrambled backward, and began shouting in an attempt to scare it away. Unmanned, the drone initiated its automatic return-to-home function, homing in on its original launch point, exactly where Tommy now stood. The noise grew louder as it descended, further fueling the bear's agitation. The animal broke into a full charge. Within seconds, it reached him, slamming its shoulder into his chest and knocking him off his feet. The impact drove him backward into a moss-covered boulder. His vision flashed white as his head struck stone. He felt claws rake across his shoulder, tearing through his jacket, followed by intense pressure as the bear's jaws clamped down on his backpack, crushing the contents inside. The bear shook its head violently, throwing Tommy sideways. His drone came down moments later, landing on his dropped controller and tangling itself in his gear. Disoriented and injured, Tommy tried to crawl away through the undergrowth. Moving purely on instinct, the bear circled him, huffing and pawing at the ground, its agitation not yet spent. Before the animal could strike again, distant voices carried through the trees. 3 hikers traveling along a ridge had heard the commotion and were running toward the scene. Realizing what was happening, they began shouting, banging sticks against trees and throwing stones to create as much noise and motion as possible. One hiker rhythmically struck a metal trekking pole against a trunk, producing sharp metallic clangs that cut through the forest. The noise, combined with the sudden appearance of multiple people, finally broke the bear's focus. It hesitated, snorted, and then turned away, trotting back across the clearing before disappearing into the shadows of the trees. The hikers reached Tommy within minutes. He was conscious but dazed, bleeding heavily from his head and shoulder. They administered first aid, applying pressure to his wounds, while one of them used a satellite phone to call for emergency evacuation. A rescue helicopter arrived roughly 90 minutes later, guided in by GPS coordinates the hikers transmitted. Tommy was airlifted to the hospital in Rovaniemi, where doctors treated deep lacerations to his right shoulder and upper back that required over 70 stitches. He also suffered a concussion, bruised ribs, and extensive soft tissue trauma. His drone and equipment were destroyed. He remained hospitalized for 5 days before returning home to recover. Though his physical injuries healed within weeks, the emotional toll lingered. Within a month, Tommy sold the rest of his drone gear, unable to shake the anxiety he now associated with flying near wildlife. An investigation by Finnish wildlife authorities concluded that the bear had likely perceived the drone sound as a threat or intrusion into its feeding area. Officials issued updated guidelines for drone operators working in wilderness zones, emphasizing minimum distances of at least 500 meters from any large predators and advising immediate landing if animals displayed agitation. The 3 hikers who had intervened were later commended by local authorities for their quick actions. Tommy personally contacted them to express his gratitude, acknowledging that his enthusiasm for capturing dramatic footage had overridden basic safety awareness, and that their courage had almost certainly saved his life.